What if the band that sold 30 million copies of one album broke up not because it failed, but because it worked too well? Mark Knopfler built Dire Straits, fired his own brother, replaced his own drummer mid-album, then walked away from stadiums, from millions in royalties, from his own Hall of Fame induction. He chose peace over legend. No scandal, no overdose, just silence. This is the Mark Knopfler problem that Dire Straits couldn't survive. Newcastle, England, in the middle of the 1970s. While punk rock tore through Britain with safety pins and snarling rage, one quiet literary young man was moving in the opposite direction entirely. Mark Knopfler studied English at the University of Leeds. He had worked as a junior newspaper reporter for the Yorkshire Evening Post, writing obituaries, including one for Jimi Hendrix in September of 1970. He had even settled into a stable, respectable job as an English lecturer at Loughton College in Essex. He was not chasing rebellion. He was not chasing volume or spectacle. He was chasing something quieter and far more honest. In April 1977, Knopfler gave up the lecturer's life and moved to London, settling into a cramped flat with his younger brother David, a social worker, and a friend named John Ilsley, who was studying at college and working as a timber broker on the side. Together with an experienced session drummer named Pick Withers, the four of them began playing under a name that captured exactly where they stood financially. They called themselves Dire Straits. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The breakthrough came almost by accident, the way the best ones often do. Using a small personal loan, the band booked cheap studio time at a modest recording space in Islington. On a single night in July of 1977, they recorded a 5-song demo tape. One of those songs was called Sultans of Swing. A London radio DJ heard the demo, loved what he heard, and placed it straight into the rotation of his late-night program. Within 2 months, word had spread far enough that a major recording contract landed in the band's lap. Their self-titled debut album introduced the world to something rock and roll had not heard in years. Rather than using a pick, Knopfler played fingerstyle, coaxing a clean, conversational tone out of a 1961 Fender Stratocaster that sounded less like a performance and more like someone leaning across a table to tell you a story. The album was recorded for a modest sum, and it climbed to #1 in Germany, Australia, and France. It felt organic. It felt honest. Nobody in the band was chasing fame. They were simply chasing the sound that lived inside Mark Knopfler's head. But even in those earliest, purest days, the seed of everything that would come later was already visible, if you knew where to look. Mark Knopfler wrote nearly every song. He arranged nearly every part. He decided exactly where each guitar fill belonged, and exactly how the final mix should breathe. And because his instincts kept being proven right, because the reviews kept glowing and the sales kept climbing, nobody around him pushed back. Success rewarded his total control. And that quiet, well-earned reward would eventually become a trap that nobody in the room could see coming. The bigger Dire Straits became, the less it felt like a band of equals. It felt more and more like one man's private vision, carried out by very talented hands who had learned to stop asking questions. None of them could have known it yet, but the very qualities that made those early records so beautiful, the discipline, the precision, the refusal to settle for anything less than exactly right, were quietly writing the first lines of the band's eventual ending. By the middle of 1980, Dire Straits were recording their third album, Making Movies, inside a legendary studio in New York City. Knopfler wanted a bigger, more cinematic sound this time, so he brought in producer Jimmy Iovine, who had worked with artists like Patti Smith and Tom Petty. He also brought in keyboardist Roy Bittan from Bruce Springsteen's touring band, whose sweeping piano work would help redefine the group's entire sonic identity. The results, everyone agreed, were extraordinary.
Yes, and an old guitar is all he can afford.
But the cost of getting there fell hardest on the one person standing closest to Mark Knopfler, his own brother. David Knopfler had been there from the very beginning, in that cramped London flat, chasing the exact same dream as Mark. But as the band's direction grew more exacting and more uncompromising, David found himself increasingly boxed out of his own band. The sessions grew tense. Tensions over direction, control, and working style kept building. And by August of 1980, David Knopfler walked away from Dire Straits for good. Mark quietly re-recorded most of his brother's guitar tracks himself, or handed the parts to an uncredited session player, and the band moved forward without ever looking back. This was the first real casualty of the band's rising success, and it was not money. It was family. It was partnership. The man who had helped start Dire Straits in that tiny flat realized there was no longer room in it for two creative voices. Only one. Here is the truth. Most casual fans never understood about what happened inside that band. It was never about anger. It was never about drugs or excess or the usual rock and roll wreckage. It was about control. Mark Knopfler heard every single note in his head long before a musician ever picked up an instrument. He was polite. He was famously soft-spoken. He almost never raised his voice. But his authority in the studio was absolute, and it was entirely uncompromising. Slowly, one by one, the members of Dire Straits stopped feeling like collaborators, helping build something together. They became something closer to gifted technicians, hired to execute somebody else's singular vision with flawless precision. Musicians who had signed up for a band, a partnership, a shared adventure, were slowly discovering that the adventure had a single author. They were welcome to play beautifully. They were not welcome to argue. And because the music sounded so extraordinary, because critics kept calling these albums masterpieces, nobody wanted to be the one who complained about the price of admission. And here is the cruelest irony sitting at the center of this entire story. The records kept getting better. Making Movies and then Love Over Gold 2 years after that were hailed by critics as genuine masterpieces, filled with sprawling, ambitious compositions like the 14-minute epic Telegraph Road and the haunting, wordless Private Investigations. Every rave review, every triumphant chart position reinforced the exact same lesson inside Mark Knopfler's mind. Total control was the only reliable path to greatness. That lesson was about to help him build a commercial monster he could no longer control. In 1985, Dire Straits released an album called Brothers in Arms, and the world of popular music was never quite the same again. Fueled by the sudden explosion of a new television channel called MTV, and by a biting, satirical single called Money for Nothing that featured a guest vocal from Sting, the album became a genuine global phenomenon. It became one of the first albums to sell over 1 million copies on compact disc, a brand new format most listeners had barely heard of. Worldwide sales would eventually surpass 30 million copies. Dire Straits, the once quiet pub band from a cramped London flat, had somehow become one of the biggest musical acts on the entire planet.
Money for nothing and your chicks for free.
This should have felt like the dream fully realized. Instead, it was the exact moment Mark Knopfler began to quietly resent the life he had built for himself. Even during the recording sessions, tucked away on the remote island of Montserrat, Knopfler's perfectionism reached a level that pushed clean past the limits of ordinary collaboration. 6 weeks into the process, he and his co-producer decided the band's longtime drummer simply was not right for the delicate, high-fidelity digital sound they were chasing. That drummer was quietly eased out of the sessions, and a session legend named Omar Hakim was flown in overnight. Hakim rebuilt much of the album's drum work in a very short time. Then came the tour that followed, 248 concerts, 23 countries, stadiums packed with people singing every word back at a man who, more and more, simply wanted silence. His bandmate John Illsley and the band's management thrived on the sheer scale of it all, the private planes, the front page coverage, the sense that they had reached the very summit of the industry. But for Knopfler, the endless interviews, the exhausting travel, and the crushing administrative weight of running what had essentially become a global corporation began to eclipse every reason he had ever picked up a guitar in the first place. He was no longer a man trapped by failure. He was a man trapped by his own staggering success. Every new hit record and every sold-out stadium no longer felt like a triumph. It felt like another obligation, another year of his private life quietly signed away to a machine that refused to slow down for anyone. Following that grueling world tour and a headlining performance at a massive tribute concert honoring Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday, Mark Knopfler finally reached his breaking point. In September of 1988, he told the press that Dire Straits was going on indefinite hiatus. He said simply that he needed rest. His bandmates assumed this was a pause before the next great chapter of the band's story. Mark Knopfler was already, quietly and privately, looking for the exit door. Think about the strange shape of that kind of unhappiness. This was not a man staring down eviction notices or empty venues. This was a man standing inside the exact success he had spent a decade chasing, discovering that the view from the top felt nothing like what he had imagined. The bigger the machine grew, the smaller his own private life seemed to become. And the rest of the band, still riding the wave, had no real idea the captain was already planning to quietly step off the ship. During that long hiatus, Knopfler retreated into smaller, gentler work that let him breathe again. He wrote atmospheric, roots-based film scores for pictures like Local Hero and The Princess Bride. He formed a relaxed acoustic side project called the Notting Hill Billies, with old friends playing country blues music in small rooms for the simple, uncomplicated joy of it. For the first time in years, he could make music on a human scale, far away from stadium lights and screaming crowds and endless press obligations. But while Mark Knopfler found his peace, the rest of Dire Straits remained frozen in place, entirely dependent on a decision that was never theirs to make. The band had no real identity beyond Mark Knopfler, no other primary songwriter, no other voice that audiences associated with those songs, no path forward without him. That dependency became undeniably clear when Knopfler reluctantly reassembled the band in 1990 to record what would become their sixth and final studio album, On Every Street. Released in September of 1991, the record leaned into a looser blend of roots, country, and blues influences. It was a fine album by any reasonable measure, but it lacked the singular, driving focus of their earlier work, and it leaned heavily on outside session musicians, simply to fill the gaps left behind by years of quiet departures.
On every street.
The tour that followed nearly broke everyone involved. Bass player John Illsley later recalled a moment of complete disorientation somewhere on that endless road, turning to a crew member backstage just to ask what country they were even standing in that night. Marriages were falling apart back home. Fathers were missing their children growing up, one missed birthday at a time. What had once been an artistic adventure had quietly become an endurance test with no clear finish line in sight. The men playing these songs night after night were no longer chasing glory. They were simply trying to survive the schedule long enough to get home. Everyone standing near Mark Knopfler could see exactly where all of this was heading, but only one man on that stage had the power to decide whether Dire Straits would continue to exist at all. The same total control that had protected the band's quality for over a decade had also stripped it of any ability to survive without his active, exhausting participation. On October 9th, 1992, in the Spanish city of Zaragoza, Dire Straits played the final show of that tour. Mark Knopfler quietly decided, somewhere in that moment, that he would never put himself through the machine again. There was no shouting match backstage that night, no thrown instrument, no slammed door. Just a quiet, private certainty settling over one exhausted man, while the rest of the band packed up their gear, assuming, as they always had, that there would be another tour, another album, another chapter still waiting somewhere down the road. Following that tour, and a final live retrospective album released in 1995, Mark Knopfler quietly dissolved Dire Straits and stepped into a solo career of his own choosing. There was no dramatic farewell concert, no emotional press conference, no public announcement dripping with stage drama. The band that had once filled stadiums across every continent simply stopped, and the silence that followed felt almost louder than anything that had come before it. For the next 3 decades, offers poured in relentlessly. Massive reunion tours, enormous paydays that would have tempted almost anyone else in the business. Every single one of them was declined. Knopfler made clear, again and again, that the scale of what Dire Straits had become was simply too large, too suffocating for him to ever willingly revisit. Fans kept hoping anyway. Former bandmates like John Illsley remained genuinely open to playing together again. Mark Knopfler had already moved on, content in the quieter, smaller life he had deliberately built for himself. That resolve held firm even in April of 2018, when Dire Straits was formally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Knopfler simply declined to attend the ceremony. There was no live performance to mark the honor, no acceptance speech delivered at the podium. It confused fans and surprised former bandmates alike, but it was entirely consistent with the man they had always known him to be. Dire Straits was not destroyed by drugs or bankruptcy or public scandal, the usual wreckage that ends so many great bands. It was carefully dismantled because the one person who made it all possible no longer wanted to live the massive, exhausting life required to keep the machine running. Today, the music of Dire Straits still sounds remarkably timeless. That clean, literary guitar tone, those long, patient songs that trusted listeners enough to sit inside a story rather than rushing toward another chorus. Millions of new listeners continue to discover Sultans of Swing and Brothers in Arms every single year, often with no idea how quietly it all came to an end. Yet one of rock's biggest bands simply stopped, while still a major global act, and never once looked back. It was not because the audience walked away. It was not because the songwriting dried up, or the talent faded. It was because Mark Knopfler chose peace over remaining one of the biggest rock stars on the entire planet. That is the paradox sitting at the heart of this whole story. The same perfectionism, the same fierce independence, the same refusal to compromise, gave the world some of the greatest rock records ever committed to tape. And those very same qualities made the band impossible to sustain the moment its creator wanted his private life back. Greatness and fragility, it turned out, had been built from the exact same material all along. Dire Straits did not fall apart because Mark Knopfler changed over the years. They fell apart because, at his core, he never did. There is something almost comforting in that, for anyone who ever loved this band. Nothing was stolen from Dire Straits by tragedy, and nothing was wasted through recklessness. The catalog stands complete, untouched by years of diminishing returns or awkward reunion cash grabs. Every record still sounds exactly as intentional as the day it was made. Because the man who made it never once let go of the wheel, right up until the moment he chose to park the car for good. Dire Straits proved that some bands do not collapse from failure. They collapse from success outgrowing the man who built them. Mark Knopfler gave the world timeless music, then quietly walked away from a level of fame most artists would trade everything for, choosing peace over the machine. His songs remain. His silence remains louder still. What part of this story surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from rock's golden era.